Today's presentation is a little, as they say, off topic, because I want to talk about my spiritual father, my Rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, Tzadik Zichron Livracha. I just found out about him that he used to hate speaking at a levaya because he never felt that you could actually encapsulate who a person is in just a couple of hours after a person passes away. You need time. He used to like to speak at the end of a week. And the last week for me has been literally, it's a river of tears. Every single day listening to Hespedim, to obituaries, about a person who literally for 37 years held my hand in every small little teeny weeny little step, both spiritually and as part of my family, and seeing my kids being born, bar mitzvah, and married off, every small little thing, he was part of that. So to give him a tribute, I had to think a lot. On Thursday night, online, I spoke to my male students, and I gave him over what he did for me in terms of being a Torah student, in terms of being a Talmud Chacham, my methodology of teaching and learning. Today I want to speak about something else. I want to speak a little bit more about who he was as a human being and how a little bit that you and I can learn from him. So I want to begin with an incredible observation from this week's parsha from Rabbi Yerucham of the Mir. So this week's parsha, we meet two of the most awesome women of all time. Who? There we go, Yocheved and Miriam. Without question, they were the female leadership during the time of the Exodus. And the Torah says the following thing. Let me just quote. The Torah says, Vayoymeh melech Mitzrayim lemiyaldei se'ivrios. The king of Egypt said to the Jewish midwives, Asher shem ha'echad shifra, v'shem ha'echad pua. So the first one's called Shifra, and the second one is called Pua. Rashi says, who is Shifra and Pua? Zoi Yocheved. So Shifra is Yocheved, Shemeshaperes is Avlat. Because what is her expertise? So the split second you're born, you're kind of disgusting looking. So I know how to say this nicely. There's this like green slime called lavernix that covers you. And sometimes you have little bits of limbs that are not fitting in here and there. And there's this midwife, a nurse, and she, with her magic hands, within a couple of seconds, can fix you all up, can wash off all the gunk and the muck and the slime, and turn you back to your mama within seconds, looking all pretty and all cute. And this is called the Shifra. The Shifra, Mishaperes Isaflad, Vlad, this was Yocheved's professional name. This was her nom de guerre, as they say. This was her professional name that she went out as Shifra, the one that cleaned babies. Who was Pua? So Pua, says Rashi, Kederach Hanashim Hamafaises Tinak Haboche. Women who know how to sing to a child when the baby cries. She was called Pua, apparently, so what we call a lullaby, because you said la 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 la. She was, those days it was like a poo-poo by. The way they used to sing was like poo 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 poo. And those of you who are British, so you know how all our horrible, horrible nursery rhymes, rock-a-bye baby on a treetop. When baby shall fall, the baby shall rot. And all the things that made my nation great and powerful during the 19th century. But the point is that here we have Miriam. She was the poo-poo queen. No one could sing to a baby better than her. So Rabbi Yerucham asked the following question. This question sticks out. We all know the first time you meet something in the Torah, you find its essence. This is a rule that beginnings are crucial. I don't want to scare you people, but when you go on the dating scene, so they know, most people, by the time they get married, they'll tell you that 90% of what they needed to know, they got in the first few seconds. It's those moments of the foundations, the beginnings, the open impressions. So the Torah, so to speak, gives us the secrets and the essence of who a person is. In this week's parsha, we find out what leadership is all about. You study the opening stories of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses. The same way over here, we're meeting these two incredibly amazing women. Shifra and Pua, Yocheved and Miriam, they defied Paro. Now again, if you look at this through the lens of the Holocaust, imagine that you're being intimidated by the Gestapo, and they can do anything they want to you and to your children and to your family, and you defy them knowing that you could die, knowing that terrible things could happen to you and your family, but you don't care. You do not care. You do what's right. You do what's necessary. You are a true hero. Yocheved and Miriam were the great female heroines of the Exodus. Miriam especially goes out. The Torah tells us that she was, so to speak, at the time of the splitting of the sea, she was the leader of the women. She taught them how to sing. I actually think that she's insanely cool because she played the drums. I don't know what it is. It's something I always picture coming out with a drum set out of Egypt. I mean, it's probably one of these like tambourine type of things. But the point is that Miriam is, in the language of the Kabbalists, she was called Bechinas Torah Shebal Peh. She's the essence of the oral law. The Be'er Miriam, Miriam's well, that fed the Jewish people for 40 years with water. When it came to the land of Egypt, to the land of Israel, it was hidden in the Sea of Galilee, in the Kinneret. And the Arizal tells us that when he wanted his student, Reb Chaim Vital, to taste from the fountains of wisdom, he would take him to the Sea of Galilee and found the exact spot and make him drink. And after that, his mind was opened. This was from Miriam. So when you stop and think about it, it's kind of strange that the first time that we meet these two women, we find one is the one that used to clean babies and the one that used to sing babies. Now this is Neve, so you guys are kind of like the wrong crowd. But sometimes if I would say this over in a college campus, a girl would come up to me and say to me, Rabbi, I find this offensive. And you laugh, but it's true, it is offensive. You don't want to be remembered as a girl that sings to children when you are the most powerful, most famous person in your generation. It's not what they're going to write up about you when they do your obituary when you're 120, that you know how to clean a baby from the muck and the gunk. So Rabbi Yerucham says, and I'm going to share with you his words, because these words could be, at least for me, they're the most important words, at least for me personally. Rabbi Yerucham said many famous things, but this could well be the most powerful thing for me, at least. And as a teacher, if I had to teach you one big idea, which is the opposite of everything that the culture back home taught you, it's this incredibly powerful, unique idea from Rabbi Yerucham. Rabbi Yerucham says, and I quote, I gave you the exact words, he says, Ki ein bebriya, leidvarim ketanim v'leidvarim gedolim, eliyesh anashim gedolim v'anashim ketanim. There's no such thing as big events and small events, big things and small things. There's only big people and small people, which means that a person who's big is someone that does everything that's big. And as Yerucham explains, there's no way you can know when you're in touch with greatness when they're doing big things. There's no way you can know the true nature of a person. I remember when I wrote this up, this Rabbi Yerucham was just after 9/11. I call this the heroes of 9/11. Those days America, as is their way, was celebrating the hero, the guy that's not afraid to go into the fires and bring out people. And I'm not belittling even a teeny weeny bit. But the word hero, what's hero in Hebrew? Anybody know? A gibor just means a person has, gibor can mean inner strength as well. The greatest gibor of all time was Yitzchak Avinu, who was a blind man that stayed in his home. Gvura has a different connotation. I'll tell you a little, it's untranslatable into Hebrew. There's no Hebrew word for hero, because the concept of hero is not a Jewish concept. When you think of a hero, I just was in America at the end of December, so they talk about all the great heroes. It's always about things that they did in public. America's obsessed with people that do things. When you go to America and they ask you, what do you do? So you're expected to say your career, and if you answer, my mommy, so oh my gosh, they give you that look, they roll their eyes, that's it. Then you got to say, I went to this university, and I'm doing this, and last month, a famous Orthodox Jewish magazine covered great women. What do they all have in common? They all did something. When I say did something, I'm saying in inverted commas, in the American culture. They built schools, They changed the world a little bit. It's not a Jewish concept. It's not a Jewish concept. You want to see greatness. You got to see that man that went into the fires of 9/11, you got to see what he's like at home. You got to see how he talks to his wife and his children when no one's around. You have to see what he's like when he's having a hard day. If he still remembers to be gentle and sweet to the cleaning lady that's there and every other person that's around him. That's when you see greatness. Then you see that when he went in, it's all part of what makes a person great. It wasn't a moment of greatness. It wasn't a moment of greatness. The person is a great person. The person is a great person. He's always a great person. And you only really get to see it when no one's around. You only get to see it with the small little things. I once teased my friend Rabbi Kron. Rabbi Kron, if you don't know him, he's arguably the greatest speaker and writer of stories. I teased him the following way. In the year 2000, I used to have a website called Gemsem. In those days, there were thousands of young ladies that I was giving them chizuk by asking all my friends to write and sending them, ideas from Jerusalem. Gemsem sent from Jerusalem Seminary experience, whatever it is, something. And a very well-known organization in North America asked me to do a survey amongst my readers. Who was the greatest woman of the 20th century? Who was the greatest woman of the 20th century? So I politely declined. I made up some excuse why I couldn't do it. And now I'll tell you why I didn't want to do it. Because I knew exactly who was going to win. Who would win? Who was going to be the greatest woman of the 20th century? What? The founder of the Beis Yaakov movement. There we go. So she changed everything. She did a huge, big revolution in everything that today, every single one of you are Sarah Schneer's students, in a sense, all part of what she did. There's no question that she was an incredible woman. But then I asked Rabbi Kron in front of the group, we were there in Krakow in her seminary. I asked Rabbi Kron, I said, who would win the greatest man of the 20th century? So everyone looked at each other and said, the Chafetz Chaim. For sure, the Chafetz Chaim was the greatest male of the 20th century. Then I asked another question. I don't really know if any of these things are true. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to make a point. I said, who was greater, the Chafetz Chaim or the Sarah Schneer? I don't know. Probably the Chafetz Chaim. I don't know why we say these things, but he's for sure much more famous. His impact, what he did, how he changed the world. And then I asked the following question. Who was greater, the Chafetz Chaim or his wife? Got you now, okay? So, I don't know what you want to say, but I'm assuming Ishta Kagufo. Equal. They were equally great. And then I turned to Rabbi Kron. This was such a nice thing because I so love this man. I just tell you, he called me last week. For the first 2-3 minutes of the phone call, he was just crying because he knew that my Rebbe had died. He was uncontrolled. He was crying. He said he waited a few days because he knew how much I was in pain. He's a really great person. He's a really great person. But this, I little teased him. I said, Rabbi Kron, tell me a great story about the Chafetz Chaim's wife. And he was like, didn't have one. I said, that's my point. That's my point. I said, the Chafetz Chaim's wife was just as great as the Chafetz Chaim. We have no stories about her. I happen to have stories about her. They're not so incredibly amazing. You want to know Sarah Schneer was a great woman? Because on the day when they dedicated her seminary in Krakow, she was nowhere to be seen. Rabbi Teller writes so eloquently about how she was in the corner clutching her Tehillim. She so did not want to be in the limelight. She so did not want this job. She just wanted to help Jewish girls, just what she wanted to do. And she was the right person at the right time. In Judaism, we never look at people and say, wow, look what you did. We look at people and say, who are you? What are you all about? And you want to know who a person is? You got to see them when no one's looking. And then you find out the real person. And here I get to my point. My Rebbe, Rav Moshe Shapiro, Tzadik Zichron Livracha. So when we first met him, so everyone knew this man was an insane genius. The stories they said about him was like, it was just beyond his knowledge. He knew everything, deeper than everybody else. The stories about him, which is like, I'm just saying to you, the people that you know, some of you know Rabbi Hartman. Rabbi Hartman, people think of him as like the greatest commentator on the Maharal of Prague ever. But Ramesh told me that when he used to, every time he had something he couldn't understand, he would go to Ramesh Shapiro. Ramesh Shapiro would read it, and how he would read it would already give the answer, by how he'd put the emphasis on different words. And another one of my friends over here, Rabbi Pini Arbach, told me that he and his friends spent a whole year learning the laws of how to build a mikveh. And very, very complex. It's insanely complex. And then they all went to Ramesh Shapiro, the whole group, to show them what they had done in a year. And every single thing that they said over, Ramosha said it beautiful, and then he said, let me take you a level deeper, and then another level deeper. And it came out of it. He wasn't even learning those Mishnayos of mikvahs, but he was everything. He was holding in everything at such a deep level. He could always take you, wherever you went, he would go one level deeper. Ray Gershenfeld told me that he was once learning with him. At the back of the Talmud, there's always fights going on between Nachmanides, the Ramban, and the Balamar. These are two people always fighting it out. And he showed there's a book published by one of the Gedolim of the last generation that goes through these arguments and explains them. And Ramesha says, every single time he explains it, he misses the point. There's another level of depth that he always misses out. So we knew that Ramesh Shapiro was the deepest of the deepest. We knew that he had incredible knowledge. We also knew that he was a charismatic speaker. He used to speak 30 to 40 times a week. He once told me that he never said the same thing twice. And very often he would say classes that were very similar, but when you listen carefully, you realize each time he was adding another level of depth, another twist, another little thing that would shine a new light on the subject matter that he had not said anywhere else. You think about that for years after years, 30 to 40 different classes, each to, we're talking about a whole array of topics, including secret classes late at night where he would learn Kabbalah with the most brilliant Kabbalists of Jerusalem. So we knew this man was a genius. But my father always told me, beware of genius and beware of charisma. And by the way, this is an important message. In America, you have these rabbis, R-A-B-B-I-S, rabbis, who are very, very brilliant, and they know all the answers to all the questions, and they're great speakers as well. But they're not good people. If you see them once snapping at a person, or you go into their houses and see they don't treat their wives nicely, or they don't talk to their kids nicely, so these are not people you should look up to. I wouldn't even bother learning from them. Unless you see that they are consistently great in the small little things they do when no one's around, then you can say, this person, I'm going to learn Torah from them. Im rabcha doime lemalach lekim tzvakos. If your teacher is like an angel of heaven has no ego, has no agenda. He just wants to pass over God's will to the people. That's it. If that's what you see in that person, then you know you've seen greatness. So once I asked my Rabbi, I used to drive him every Friday. So I had my moment. For over 20 years, I was his Friday driver. So every time I would prepare my questions or whatever it was, and he would answer me there and then. I told him there was a big fight going on in our building between neighbors. And Ramosha heard what was going on. He said, I'll come down. I'll help you out. This is a huge thing, because this person, every second was precious. Every moment was precious. And he comes down to my house. Melissa, you know exactly where it is. Full Parnas. This helps my wife. If you ever want to come to us for a Shabbat meal, you should know that, Melissa's now Eden, right? Her little magic touch is in the food. But the point is, he came down to the building, and his genius in the human touch was incredible, and he did something that everyone was happy. But that's not why I'm telling you the story. I live on the 3rd floor, and we had a cleaning lady. His name was Sarah. Sarah, I don't know, she was like a little older. I think she was Yemenite. And she saw this rabbi come in, and he offers him a tea. He says, lo tada, no thank you, I don't need a tea. And that whole incident lasted about 15 seconds. When the whole thing was over, an hour later, when he left my house to go back to Beit Vagam, see, he walked down 2 floors with me. And when he got to the 1st floor, he looked at me and he said to me, Menachem shachachti mashu, I forgot something. He ran up to the home. I ran after him. He says, you don't have to come. I thought maybe he had an umbrella, but I was not going to let him go into the his own. He went into the house. He started running from room to room until he found the cleaning lady, and he said goodbye to her. And that's a moment where I saw greatness. The first of many, many examples where I saw greatness. I saw a person who's literally dealing with all the problems of the world. People came to him from every corner of the world. He was dealing with all the difficult questions that go on in Russia and in South America, yes, and in Mexico, they all say Moshe Shapira, the whole thing, America, Europe. He loved the French. I don't know why. I have no idea why. Again, he tolerated us Brits. But the point was, but he would say thank you to the cleaning lady. He'd run up to say thank you to the cleaning lady because she had, because she had offered him a glass of tea, and it just was the right thing to do, to say goodbye to her. And just that way that he thought was something that I saw consistently. That's the moment that I saw greatness. That's the moment that, just like Shifra and Puah, who were the greatest leaders of their generation, you don't know they're great until you see how they treat their children, that they'll never know. No one in this room knows who was the first person to sing to you, who was the first person to hold you and clean you up. Some nurse in some hospital out there without a name, you don't know who they were, but they did it. They took care of you in those first few seconds of your life with full dedication and full love, doing their job to the best of their ability. Those are the real heroes. Those are the real heroes. And I remember when I spoke after 9/11 in Stern College, and I said to them, you guys, a lot of them went to volunteer to help in Ground Zero. I said, I don't really know how to define greatness, but I do know the following. That the Jewish world of greatness is a totally different way of looking at things. And somewhere, at 4 o'clock in the morning, a baby cries. And the mama looks at her husband, this beached whale, this immovable carcass that's next to her, is snoring away. He ain't helping. And she's a full-time mommy in a full-time job, and she's exhausted, she needs to sleep, and she moves her weary body. And she moves her body, and she goes, and she takes the child, and she sings to that child, and calms him down, and calms her down, nurses her maybe. At that moment, she's become Shifra and Puah. At that moment, she's become Jewish greatness. No one will ever know. The child may never know, especially if it's a he. We'll never know. But that's Jewish greatness. That's what we're all about. It's funny, but I don't want to talk about this, but I can't help but think about it. My Rabbi Shapira used to say that if you want to know a country, you look at its leadership. Hashem sends you the people who you deserve. I don't want to go into this because it's so not the point I want to make. But your future president is really the soul of your country. Hashem clearly wanted him in. The whole reason how he got in was so beyond anything that makes any sense whatsoever. He got in, it was the equivalent of throwing a double six 10 times in a row. But Hashem says, I want you to sit in the most powerful seat in the most powerful country that the world has ever seen. And again, I don't want to talk about this because it disgusts me so much. He once mentioned, you can't quote me from my locker room talk. Remember that? I'm not going to say anything more. I'm stopping right there. But he said, you can't quote me from my locker room talk. And I say to you, that in Judaism, that's the moment where we find out who you are. That's the moment when behind closed scenes, here we would say the mikveh talk. It's just embarrassing. When men go to the mikveh on Friday afternoon, so then there's no, hey, talk to each other. You see greatness. My Rabbi Moshe Shapiro wasn't the, hey, what's up, man? He never spoke casually. Every time he talked to you, every time he would say hello, slightly different from the next time. I know how he managed to do it. Over years and years and years, we never once had a trivial conversation. How's your day? Fine. How's your day? Fine. You talk to the neighbor. Have a good day. Have a good day. He couldn't deal with that. As Rabbi Zilber, one of the great rabbis of Jerusalem, said a few days ago, he had a peh kadosh. He trained himself. Everything came out of his mouth was exactly what needed to be said. He knew how to make a person feel comfortable. He knew how to make a person laugh. He had a terrific sense of humor. He knew how to speak to little children. He knew how to speak to special needs kids. He spoke also to the most brilliant minds of the generation, the leaders of the previous generation. He knew how to speak to the This is a story that's really not for now, because it's such a cool story to the president of, I think it was Azerbaijan. He was sent there by Steinman to help out the Jewish community. He knew how to speak to a king of a republic in Borat country. I don't even know how to describe that part of the world. But he knew exactly the right words, the right things to say. That's where you see true greatness. But Moshe once told us how he learned to think. It's an interesting story. Normally, you don't go up to Moshe Shapiro and says, how come you're so deep? How come you're so deeper than everyone else? But this happened in Purim, and one of my friends was drunk, and he could get away with it. He just asked him, and normally Moshe Shapiro would he would ignore you, he would give you like one of his friendly slap-arounds. So he had a way with us. It was like, it was a Rabbi. But he told us a story. He thought this was the right response. And he told us that he was maybe 11 or 12. He certainly was before Bar Mitzvah. And he was hanging out in what's called the Panovich Yeshiva. The Panovich Yeshiva is till today one of the premier yeshivas of the world. And he was a child prodigy. He was a little Kim and his friends. And they were hanging out there in the courtyard, and there was a blackout. When there's a blackout, so in those days, you ran home to get candles, you just went home and waited for the blackout to ride itself out. But the Panovich Beis HaMedrash emptied out. The study hall emptied out. So Moshe and his friends said, you know what, let's go and see what goes on in there. They went in there, the place was completely empty. And there was one old man in the corner, on his own, who started saying over slowly, in the way that the Musar giants taught us how to say over a Maimer Chazal, a small section of the words of the rabbis. And he started to say it over slowly and with passion, every single word, one after the other. And when he finished saying it, he said it a second time, with the same speed and the same music and the same passion and the same patience. And he said it a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time, and he kept on going. He told us after a few times we knew this whole thing by heart. We couldn't understand why he kept on going. 15 times, 20 times, we were giggling. We thought this was ridiculous, but he kept on going. 20 times, 25 times. Sooner or later, we started to get spooked out. We knew we were seeing something that was beyond belief. After a while, there wasn't a single one of us that wasn't crying. There was tears coming out of our eyes. We were little kids. And that's the moment I realized that without ever leaving the simple meaning of the words, the infinite depths of the words of the rabbis, how you can mine it for layers upon layers upon layers of depth. That's how he studied everything. That's how he studied Talmud and all the commentaries, and Chumash and all the commentaries. And that's how he studied the Zohar and all the Kabbalistic commentaries with so much depth. And this incredible depth that he had spilt out with his power of speech and how he dealt with the human world, with the beauty. He had this malchus about him. He had this royalty about him. He knew how to speak to everybody. There were certain things that he would tell us where we could see that he picked up on things that regular human beings don't pick up on. The most important influence in his life was a man called the Brisker Rav, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, who lived here in Yerushalayim. And during those important years, your late teens and your early 20s, my Rabbi was hang around him, was part of the entourage. He learned a lot from him, but he said probably the most powerful message that he ever got from the Brisker Rav was when Shabbos was over, Shabbat was over, the Brisker Rav would come home from his prayers. And they used to light the Havdalah candle. And everything was prepared for Havdalah, filled up the cup with wine. And the Brisker Rav would just stare at the Havdalah set for 20 minutes. Just for 20 minutes. Now again, you and I can do this after 30 seconds. We get like antsy. We've got to check our phones. It's like we can't stare. He did not want Shabbos to be over. He wanted to connect Shabbos to Havdalah on levels that you and I can't understand. Ramesh always wondered what was going through his mind during those times. He once told us a quip. He said it was Simchas Torah, and he was in the Chevron Yeshiva. That's where he was studying. and two of the senior rabbis of the Hebron Yeshiva were sitting next to each other and smiling at each other. And one said to the other, Yisrael am karoivoi, the nation of Israel who's close to God. And the other one said, Yisrael am karoivoi. And they looked at each other and they were just smiling. And my Rebbe said, I watched these two giants of the spirit, and I knew that what was going through their minds was something that I could never ever comprehend. Just these simple words, that we are the nation that Hashem feels close to. And they would look at these words and just a whole different perception. And that's the way that Ramesha was. Everything he saw, he would see on the deepest of the deepest. He would always come out with lines that no one else would think of. He once made a comment. I was actually there when it happened. 1990s, when did cassette recorders go out? You remember cassette recorders? Everyone know what I'm talking about? You know what cassette recorders are. Ask your grandma. So we used to have cassette recorders. So I remember there was a cassette recorder in front of him. And every time he would pause to think, he heard like a click, and the cassette recorder would stop. And then we'd carry on talking, click, whir, and it would carry on going. And he's watching this, and you could see he was very distracted. He had not heard of what's called voice-activated technology. He did not know the thing existed. And eventually he stopped the class and says, I can't, this thing is driving me crazy. Whose is it? So, whatever. Chaim says it's mine. He says, what is this? He says, it's a voice-activating thing. Whenever you stop, so it knows to stop. That way, it saves space on the cassette reel. So Rav Moshe gave this sigh, this crack. He says, he says, once upon a time, the whole class was understood from those silences. The whole secret was there when everyone was quiet. And those of you get a chance, which I can't explain now, you go to the first Rashi in Vayikra, when it says that Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu time to think between every word that he said. And that thinking is something that Rav Moshe felt was so precious. He so wanted our generation to be able to think. He was so terrified that we would become a nation that every time there's like a quiet, then we would just like check our phones nervously. I also do it, so don't feel embarrassed. Once upon a time, people would have a few seconds of silence, they would think. And then they would carry on, they would go back and they remember what they were thinking about before and then go back and think. And that's how people became great. And he so much wanted that for our generation. So let me just tell you a few stories about the beauty of the man. All these stories I just heard in the last week. Some of them I'd heard before, but just now, the people involved, these are all my friends. These are all my friends telling these stories. A friend of mine lives here in Harnoff. And he told me that he's going to let Pesach Krohn. I told this story to Rabbi Pesach Krohn in that conversation. Pesach goes, I want to write this in my next book. Okay, so I went up to this person and he said, yeah, I'll tell over the story to Rabbi Krohn in all its details, and I'll let Rabbi Krohn write it up. In the next book, the first story is going to be this story. But I'm going to tell it to you just an abbreviated version just to make the point. A friend of mine was childless for 7 years. And his father-in-law, who's a person who's a well-known community figure, his father-in-law asked Rav Moshe, come, give him a blessing. His blessings were intensely powerful. There's something about it. He had this holy mouth. So Rav Moshe says, if I give them a blessing for children, I have to go to the house. And I have to speak to the wife as well. And he comes in, there's the young couple after 7 years of marriage. He says, in this house, you will hear the reverberation of laughter emanating from your children. And I don't know the exact words he said. Koil, tzahales, simcha, yavomi bayis hazeh will come from this house. So it's a great bracha. And of course, a year later, they had a baby girl. But they were already living then in America. So it wasn't exactly a great fit. It wasn't, like it was a great story. They had a kid after a year from the bracha. But he said, in this house will be the sounds of simcha. You fast forward. 20 years later, this girl gets engaged to an Israeli boy. And the story is a true story. They needed to rent an apartment in the holy city of Yerushalayim. And they went all over the place, back and forth, until they finally got one apartment they could move in. Well, guess what? It's the same place that they had rented 20 years earlier. And that's where they made the l'chaim. And that's where the sound of laughter, but it wasn't exactly the birth, it was the engagement. But that was Rav Moshe's promise. Now the cool part of the story is that when my friend said this over to Rav Moshe, so Rav Moshe rolled his eyes and says, don't tell this to the newspapers, they'll make this into a miracle story. That's what he said. He so did not want these stories to come out. He so did not want these stories to come out. My chavrusa never told me the following. I found this out this week. My chavrusa told me that he always had one son, and when the son had bar mitzvah, so he begged Rav Moshe, this is my only son, please come to the bar mitzvah. And Rav Moshe said, I'll try. And he missed it. And when he met my chavrusa, he said, I'm sorry, but you know what? I'll come to the next bar mitzvah. So he said, Rabbi, I'm not sure it's going to work out that way. I'm not sure we're having children anymore. So he says, whatever, it's Hashem, I'll come to the next bar mitzvah. A year later, they have a baby girl. So it was exactly fitting in, but that changed everything. They had a baby girl. He told us to Rav Moshe, and he says, I'm not sure you'll be dancing at a bar mitzvah, but thank you very much. Whatever you said, we had a baby girl. Rav Moshe said, well, what's the big deal? I want to dance at the bar mitzvah. And 2 years later, they had a baby boy. And Baruch Hashem, he had his bar mitzvah just 2 or 3 years ago. And it's just incredible, the power of his mouth. But Rav Moshe told us many, many times, he's not into miracle stories. He doesn't like all these things. They don't impress him. So I have a story which doesn't end exactly the way it's supposed to. She's actually like a second cousin. We made her shidduch. And she lives in St. Louis. Anyone from St. Louis? Over here? Her name's Donna, whatever it is. And her husband is Gershon. And he's one of my best friends. And he was part of our group going back 30 years ago, part of Rav Moshe Shapira's group. So, it's 30 years ago. 37 years ago. I'm that old, ladies. 37 years ago. He was part of that chabura. And his name's Gershon. And 5 years ago, my good friend passed away to cancer. But the years before that, obviously, he lived in St. Louis, and he turned to my Rabbi for strength. So I got this email 2 days ago from Donna, and he wrote the following. When Gershon got sick, among other things, Rav Moshe told him was to learn Torah. So the Torah, if you don't know what the Torah is the predecessor to the Shulchan Aruch. It's massive, many, many, many volumes. And it goes through all of halacha. And every single opinion is brought down. It's a massive compendium that we learn in yeshivas. He told Gershon in unequivocal terms that he would come to the Siyum, and also that he would dance with him at his children's wedding in Eretz Yisrael. We were pleasantly shocked by what we considered an amazing haftacha, an amazing promise. Brackets, I never knew why Torah in particular, but not having Gersh's level of bitachon, of simple faith, and since it seemed like a very long set of svarim, I told Gersh to learn the Torah very, very slowly, so the Siyum would take a long time till it happens. Gershon was completely at peace with his illness from the moment Rav Moshe told him these two things. His perfect devotion to his Rebbe meant there was no question of worrying or doubting his words. You knew Gersh was a warrior, so this was remarkable on so many levels. His emunah in Rav Moshe was unshakable. When Gershon passed away, I had a hard time understanding why Rav Moshe spoke so specifically. He didn't say, I hope he will, but very emphatically that they would make a Siyum on the Torah, and they would dance at his weddings. After 5 years, and after the Patir of Rav Moshe, I realized what a precious gift his Rebbe gave him with those words. He gave him the security that Rav Moshe had it all under control, that he could focus on his learning, on the Torah, and living his life. My husband Gershon used to describe Rav Moshe as having big shoulders, that he was able to carry the burdens of his Talmidim. Rav Moshe took the burden of illness from Gershon's shoulders and took it on his own. Although I'll never know what Rav Moshe's words really meant on a deeper level, they gave us 4 years of appreciating each and every day. And until the very last few weeks, it never occurred to either of us that he wouldn't live. And she writes, on another note, one of the first things Gershon told me about Rav Moshe was that he had a really cool wide brim hat. He couldn't wait to get one. I remember him buying one in Borough Park, just like Rav Moshe's. I know this will never make into Yatid Ne'eman or Art Scroll, But before I knew how choshev his Rebbe was, I knew he had an awesome sense of style. Gotta laugh at something. When my granddaughter was born, Princess Hani, some of you know who she is. So she has Downs. And I knew that Rabbi Shapiro had a special place in his heart for special needs kids. But like a really special place in his heart. And I went to him. My mechutin was asked the question: is it appropriate to name your granddaughter after your grandmother who had passed away if she has Downs? That was the question that he asked. She's named Chani. Chani is named after my son-in-law Yerucham's father's mother. So is it appropriate? So Ramesh told me, he says, tell your mechotin that you cannot have a greater blessing. Revach naki is the words he used. It's it's gain. It's a win-win situation. Why? Because when you name someone after someone else, so you're hoping that this new person will somehow, during his deeds and actions, will be as a schus, as a merit for the person that passed away. Anyone that's named after someone, the pressure's on, ladies. You're supposed to be able to give merit to that person. Well, he said a Down child is not capable of sinning, but she is a pure and undiluted generator of chesed, of kindness all around her. And by the way, if you see her, the first thing you do is you smile, right? You've seen her. She's like the cutest thing ever. I'll show you pictures. But the point is that you're a generator of good deeds. So she's just, everything about it is just goodness. He wrote a letter to a friend of mine, Rabbi Rabinowitz in Far Rockaway, when he had his son Nassim Nata, and told him that even we know that these people have very high souls from very high places. It's important to treat them like any other child. The word special, he said, every small, teeny, weeny little improvement in the child, you should see it as something, as a source of great joy. And you have to take care. The child should feel good about him or herself. You can't let them go with their shirt hanging out and stuff like that. You build them as much as you can, and you should celebrate every small little development that the child has. Well, 2 days ago, my friend Yossi Cohen told me a story. He heard this from Rabbi Tadris Miller in Gateshead. I'm going to try and tell the story without crying. It's a little hard for me because I'm still getting the goosebumps from the story. Rabbi Shapiro, my Rabbi, was asked to fly in to America just for 1 day to speak for the parents of these children. I don't know which organization it was, but he flew to New York. And my Rabbi, with all his genius, knows he's a very passionate and very, 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 very emotional person. And as he walked into the hall and he saw all the parents of these children, he almost fainted. And he had to go back outside and he said, I can't speak to these people. It's too hard for me. It's too hard for me. So they begged him and they cajoled him. They said, we flew in for this. He said, no, it's too hard for me. Eventually, he said, I'll speak for a few minutes. And he came in. And I'm telling you now, this is like classic, because whenever you figure you know what he's going to say, he always says something deeper and something more profound. This is what he told these parents. He told over a story. The story must go back to the 50s. But a young man, his wife got sick, and he had to take care of the children. So let's just pretend that he had 5 or 6 kids, and he's playing Mr. Mom, and he's useless at it, and he's taking care of the children and everything like that, and his uncle walks in and sees him, doing laundry and changing diapers and making dinner, and he's made the following comment. He says, how will your kids ever be able to pay you back? So he was taken aback by the question, and he gave, which I think is the answer I would have probably given. He said, I just want my kids to grow up as good, healthy Jews, and they should pass it on to the next generation. I will get nachas, I will get Jewish joy by seeing them doing good things for the next generation. That's all I need. And that was the end of the conversation. And that night, this young man was thinking over what he said. He wasn't sure if he gave the right answer. He said, you know what? Tomorrow I'll go and ask the Briskerov. Remember the Briskerov? It's my Rebbe's Rebbe. It's my Rebbe's Rebbe. He went to the Briskerov, and he said to the Briskerov, this is what my uncle said. This is the answer that I gave. What do you think? The Briskerov says, I really, really do not like the question, and I really, really do not like your answer. When the Briskerov said that, it was like, whoa. He was like, on fire. Soloveitchik style. This is that. He did not like the question, did not like the answer. He says, what do you mean? He says the Jewish home is built on Avram and Sarah. And Avram and Sarah, when they did an act of charity, act of chesed was pure chesed, nothing to do with what you get back. Nothing to do with what comes out of it. You do it because it's the right thing to do, period. You don't think about how you feel about it. You don't do about how what you get back or what it makes you do. This is irrelevant. You do it because it's the right thing to do. The question is illegitimate. What you do for your children, you do because it's the right thing to do, period. You do chesed. A Jew just chesed. So Reb Moshe looked at these parents, and with tears in his eyes, he said to them the following words. He said, myself and all the other people I know, we don't really know what it means to build a Jewish home. Because when we raise our kids, it's always for something. We're always picturing one day we take them under the chuppah. One day we see our grandchildren and we can get to play with grandkids. There's always something that we get at the end. There's always some kind of a nachas that we get at the end. But you with your kids, you give and you give and you give and you just give. That's it. Without wanting to get anything back in return. To these kids, you just give. And he said that you people, you are the real continuers of Abraham and Sarah. You are the ones that are building the Jewish home, the way that Avram and Sarah used to do. Chesed naki, pure chesed, unadulterated chesed. When someone came to him from South America, they had a question in Brazil, of an androgynous. In English it's called an androgyne. An androgyne is someone who Nebuch has two genders, double gender. So in halacha, in the world of halacha, this is an incredible case. A person comes up to you, he's both male and female in one body. There's all kinds of halacha situations that come up, fascinating, in Mishnais, in the Talmud. Most rabbis would relish having to deal in real life with an androgynous, with an androgyne. But when a person came from Brazil and said a story about a Jewish person who was androgynous, the first thing my Rebbe did was burst out crying. Then, afterwards, he dealt with the halachic thing. The first thing he did is he cried, because this is a real person who's suffering. This is a real Jew that's suffering. And I remember how many times in my car when I drove him on Fridays, when I would tell him about NCSY kids, and the struggles they had with their parents, and what they used to do to be able to keep Shabbos, to keep kosher. You could see his eyes going moist, and it meant so much to him, every single small little success that they had. And the pain that he had when I told him, I remember I was the one, I have the merit of teaching him the following phrase, crack square. 1 mile away from the Kotel, he was shivering when I told him that this thing exists. It was so difficult, it was so painful to him to think about Jewish kids, what they go through. He cared so much about every single one of us. Last night, I heard a hesped from Rabbi and David, Shlita, probably the only person left of the great thinkers of our generation. Here in Pachad Yitzchak, 3-minute walk from here. He spoke to a packed audience, all of Ramesh's Talmidim and his Talmidim, and he threw in something that I had suspected this for many decades, but he threw it in. He said, we all know that Ramesh would regularly fast for his students, that they should succeed. Now, I knew that Ramesh Shapiro was a chronic faster. I always thought he did it for religious reasons, for spiritual reasons. Whenever I was asking him, we offered him this, that, he wouldn't drink, he would never touch food. Almost, I never seen he did not eat. He once said he never drank Coca-Cola because he saw a sign that said Coca-Cola, taste of life. and said, okay, that's what they call it, I'm not touching it. But he used to fast for us. He used to fast for people. People used to come to him with their pain. And Rav Shapiro used to tell them what to do. And when they left, without anyone knowing, he would take upon himself a fast for that person. That's Jewish greatness. That's the thing that you never get to see. That's the thing that I, as a student, after 37 years, I have to find out this thing, to see what my Rebbe was really all about. The things that he did when no one could see him, behind the scenes. When my good friend, Rabbi Yechmiel Yukelson, when he was your age, was invited for Seder night to Rav Moshe Shapiro's house. I've never seen a person so happy. He was like a puppy dog wagging his tail. We wanted to slap him. Today he's a Rosh Hashiva in Torah Simcha. But he goes to Rav Moshe Shapiro's house, and he's expecting to be taken to the heavenly realms. He couldn't wait to see, what does Seder night look like at the Shapiro house? He was convinced that he would see angels appear and all kinds of mystical things happening. Well, guess what? In those days, his son Shlomi was 5 years old. The whole evening, which did not last long, all Rav Moshe Shapiro did was tell stories like a kindergarten teacher teaching a 5-year-old describing the Exodus. That's what he did. He sang and told stories, and they ate, and he told more stories to his little 5-year-old and ignored everyone else. And it was over in no time. And then Rav Moshe Shapiro went to his room, and he started learning, and he came out for davening the next day. How much would we like to know what happened in that room when the doors are closed, and he sits there studying all night long the secrets of the Exodus. But that we never get to see. We never got to see what he did when he used to disappear for days at a time with just 1 or 2 books, and that's all he used to have. He used to study and study. But that was it. And publicly, he was like the most normal, friendly person. He knew what to say to everyone. I took girls to him. I took Neve girls to him. He knew exactly what to say. But the true person will never get to know. My last story to you. I once went with Yeshua Hartman. Some of you know any of the Brits over here? Rabbi Hartman, I mentioned his name earlier, the great master of the Maharal. We went to East Europe. It was actually with a busload of seminary girls. We were the rabbis. And it was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And when it was over, we came back. On Shvi Shel Pesach, we went to visit our Rabbi. It was every Yom Tov. There was a time when he used to give us a Torah class. And Rav Moshe Shapiro asked us, what thoughts did you have during that time that you were with, the girls? What did you think about? Any profound ideas you want to share with us? He always used to push us to come up with our own ideas. And I told him, I had not really a deep thought, but it occurred to me the following. When I went to the shul of the Ramah, and there was a sign, in this place, we have a tradition that the Ramah used to pray. The Ramah was the father of the halachic system for Ashkenaz Jews. I felt tremendously connected to the Ramah. When we were in Prague and I saw a sign, this is where the Maharal of Prague used to pray, in the Altneu Shul. I felt tremendously connected to the Maharal of Prague. I said, Rebbe, how can it be that in Krakow I feel close to the Ramah, and in Prague I feel close to the Maharal, but when I go to the Kotel, in Yerushalayim or HaKadosh, I go to a place where everything happened. It's where the world was created. It's where the Akedah happened. It's where Yaakov had his dream. That's where, David HaMelech was, and King Solomon built the temple. It's where the Hanukkah story happened. It's where the Babylonians and the Romans came to destroy the temple. It's where the Jewish people came 3 times a year. It's where the Ramban walked. It's where the Orach Chaim HaKadosh walked. This is the place where everyone was there. I didn't felt the same way that I felt in Krakow and in Prague. So I was sure that I knew he was going to answer. I was sure he was going to look at me and say, Menachem, you get used to anything. You get used to the fact that you're in Yerushalayim. You've been living here. That's not what he said. Rav Moshe, as I told you, would always say something deeper than what you expect. And these are the words he said. And these words changed my whole appreciation of what it means to be living in Yerushalayim. And you ladies should remember this. because you're here in Jerusalem for a reason. He said to me the following, Menachem, when you look directly into the sun, you see nothing. That's it. When you look directly into the sun, you see nothing. Meaning, Yerushalayim, this city is so intensely holy. It's just like, ooh, you miss it. I have my own theory. That's why people go to Tzfas. Tzfas is where the shadows begin. You go to Tzfas in the mystical, but really, Yerushalayim, everything is hidden. When I went to look for my Rabbi during the Gulf War, and I said to him, wanted to know if I could travel to my sister's who was making a wedding. So his wife said, I don't know where my husband is. He's off with these Jerusalem Kabbalists. They're doing strange tikkunim, strange things to try and, make sure that no one gets hurt during the war. But that was my Rebbe, the hidden one. He was true greatness. And the more you go deeper and deeper, which is what he wanted us to do, the more you find layers upon layers of what makes that person special. So I want to finish off by saying to all of you two things. Number one, when you date, make sure that your husband has a Rebbe. It's so important. Those either, you're going to enter the dating scene. Rebbe should be connected to a Masorah, connected to a tradition of greatness. And the second thing is to remind yourself every so often how fortunate we are to be the Jewish people. That these people existed. These people existed until a week and a half ago. You could go to Rav Shapiro, my Rebbe, and you could see a person who's this giant of a human being that no one else can produce. These people don't exist anywhere else. They've never, ever existed anywhere else. These people of spirit, the deeper you go, the layers and layers of depth, the more beauty and the more holiness and the more specialness of every single word they say and everything that they do and act and speak. Yisrael Am Kareivai, Klal Yisrael. We are the nation that Kadosh Baruch Hu chose to be close to Him. Ashreinu, how happy we are. And how happy we are now that Ramesha and Shemaim is looking down at us together with all the tzaddikim, gedolim. And we look forward to be reunited with all these people with the coming of Mashiach Meher V'Yameinu. Thank you for listening.